very brightly colored and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barger, the president of Hell's Angels.
This is 1095. Okay, something a bit different today. Not so much a podcast, but more an interview with Iain, Master Iain from the Kung Fu School here in Pai. Most of us who live here in Pai, like myself, know about the Kung Fu School, but know little or nothing about Kung Fu. So I really wanted to sit down with Iain, get inside his head and, understand what is Kung Fu, where did it originate, and what do these guys at the school, these students do day to day when they're learning Kung Fu. We used a local studio, so thanks, Peter, for letting us, come into the studio for a couple of hours. And if you wait to the end of the interview, there's also a promo video about Iain's Kung Fu school here. So, and in the speaker notes, there's also links to the website and other information. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. So yeah, good to sit down and have a chat.
Yes,
Iain,
yeah.
Master Iain from
Thanks.
the local Kung Fu school. And,
Yeah.
we'll jump straight in because really this, for me, is an opportunity to learn about Kung Fu. I know a little bit and you shared some stuff after we last met. And obviously I know a bunch of the people here who are at the school, but really to be curious and understand more about it. As a starting point, it's a broad question, but, what is Kung Fu?
So, I'm going to give you three answers, I'm going to give you the simple one, the medium one, and the deep one. In simple terms, when people speaking English say Kung Fu nowadays, what they mean is Chinese martial arts. If we talk about Japanese martial arts, we talk about each one by name, so it would be karate or judo or jiu-jitsu or aikido or kenjutsu. China is huge and there's so many Chinese martial arts that they get lumped together. Okay, Kung Fu, Chinese martial arts. It's interesting for me it's interesting to understand the meaning of the term Kung Fu. Kung or Gung is work, effort, study. It's kind of putting time in. And the term implies it's work, effort or study over a long period of time. And when you put the Fu character behind it, it means the product of that work or study or effort. So anything which you have to study hard and practice hard and apply effort to master is Kung Fu. So as it was originally used in China, before the Bruce Lee craze and the term taking a slightly different meaning, it could be applied to martial arts, it could be applied to calligraphy, it could be applied to being a master chef, and believe it or not, it could be applied to flower arranging. But anything that you had to work at over a period to master was Kung Fu. And knowing that meaning gives you a better insight into what Chinese martial arts are all about, because there's something that you need to work on, really work on in order to master. Hence the term a master is someone who's put the work in. That was the medium level answer. The deep answer, what's Kung Fu? Ultimately it becomes something different to everybody, because that effort, that time that you put in, that's a personal journey. And it's a journey on which you're going to find out a lot about yourself. And it will be different for everybody. And it's kind of like there's a term, depending on which dialect you're speaking, Khon or Quan, it's kind of like a riddle, and it's something that is often used in Buddhist teaching. And you're not expected to come up with the answer. The whole point is to make you think and get you reflecting on something. And, maybe Kung Fu is the ultimate kind of riddle. You spend a lifetime trying to work out what it is all about. And everybody, you don't come up with an answer, you come up with an opinion, and everybody's opinion is going to be different because everybody's learnt something different and maybe gone to a slightly different place. But that's your kind of deep philosophical, after 40 years of study type of answer. Yeah.
Kind of branching, I mean, it's not the same question, but it's a branch off that really. A lot of people on the outside of Kung Fu will think of the physical practice of Kung Fu. If you know little about it, which I only know a little. But the way you describe it is much more about the kind of mind concentration, and you mentioned Buddhism there.
Yeah.
I practice Muay Thai. Muay Thai is very much a physical sport, and of course, it does require some sort of mental discipline. But ultimately, it's a physical sport. Kung Fu, though, is it sounds like there's a relationship between Kung Fu and kind of Eastern religions, Buddhism, Taoism. Is it? Yeah. Is there a direct link? Is it a dotted line? What are the relationship between those two?
So again, controversial, but a lot of people will say that Shaolin Kung Fu is the original martial art. First thing, let's think about that. Shaolin Kung Fu started around about 500 AD. So clearly, further back in history, there were lots of people studying fighting. So you could say studying martial arts. Yeah. So you could take Roman gladiators as a good example. So what was different about this? It was the fact that it was a discipline and a spiritual discipline. So when we have the disciplined Oriental martial arts, as we tend to think of martial arts now arising, that was Shaolin Kung Fu, the advent of Shaolin Kung Fu. And it's interesting how language changes. So when I was starting Kung Fu, beginning in the 1980s, nobody called boxing a martial art. Yeah, martial arts were things that Oriental people did, and usually kind of implied discipline and depth and philosophy and culture. Now you have a different kind of definition. Any fighting sport is considered martial art. But that kind of disciplined, philosophical, warrior monk type thing, I mean, that started with Shaolin Kung Fu. And the story's quite good, so I'm going to tell you the story. It began with the Indian monk, Bodhidharma, who travelled to China because around about that time, approximately 500 AD, Buddhism was becoming very popular in China.
So this is, this is like 1,000 years after Buddhism, roughly,
after
right?
the Buddha,
yeah. About 1,000 years later, so you got a monk now travelling to China from India?
Yes. There's different accounts of the story, but he probably was born as a prince in southeast India, what's now Tamil Nadu state. And he renounced his princehood to become a Buddhist monk. And he rose up to become the 28th patriarch of what's now called Indian Zen. So he was 28th in line in this lineage after the Buddha. There was a big demand for Buddhist teaching in China, so he travelled to China. And it's quite interesting to note he had to go by boat around Southeast Asia, because at that time the Huns dominated the plains, so the land route was impassable. So this is round about the time of Attila the Hun, so it's kind of puts it into a context there. And martial arts like Silat trace their origin to his passing around Southeast Asia.
Yep.
He became the personal teacher to the Emperor of China. And of course, at that time, China was split into two kingdoms. You had the Southern Kingdom, the Northern Kingdom. So I believe he started off in the Southern Kingdom, teaching the Emperor, and didn't work out because he couldn't speak Chinese, and the Emperor couldn't speak anything else. So he moved on, and that's when you get the legend of him floating across the Yangtze River on a willow frond, and started teaching in the Northern Kingdom, and he was appointed as the head monk of the newly built Shaolin Temple. And there are some written records that corroborate that. And this is where the story gets interesting. So you have to bear in mind, this is the guy that started Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism, as we know it, the Chinese call it Zhen Buddhism. The same character is pronounced Zen in the Japanese, and Westerners tend to follow the Japanese pronunciation. So he's very much about the mind. Yeah, his teaching is, don't look for a Buddha outside. Your own mind is the Buddha. Buddhism is a state of mind. Very negative about ritual. Ritual has its place, but if you're too focused on ritual, then you're not going to make it. Yeah. So his words, don't look elsewhere for a Buddha when your own mind is a Buddha. He was very big on meditation, introspection, etc. Comes to the temple and it's like, whoa, what am I going to do? Because these guys are hopeless. They're spending too much time on pointless ritual, pointless dogma. And interestingly, his take was they're totally unfit, and healthy mind, healthy body. You want to keep your mind in good shape, you've got to keep your body in good shape. Moreover, how do you work on someone's mind? That's very difficult. The best way is to access the mind through the body and through the breath. So I'm going to tackle this in a physical way. And the legend has it that he retired to a nearby cave and he meditated in the cave for 9 years. And during that time, he wrote 2 very famous books, the Muscle Tendon Changing Classic and the Brain Marrow Washing Classic. And he also developed the first set of Qigong exercises. Qi, the body's energy, vital energy of the body. Kung, it's the same word as Kung Fu. Yeah. So Qigong is the work, the effort on cultivating the Qi. And having spent his 9 years in the cave, he returned to the temple and started training the monks in this Qigong. And the usual course of the story is, okay, first of all, he trains them in Qigong. Where does the Qigong come from? Where do his exercises come from? As a prince, a member of the highest caste in India, he would have been trained in Vedic fighting arts as a youngster. A prince was expected to be at the front of the army. So he would have trained in kind of martial arts in India. So likely what he taught was based on what he learned there, but there's no evidence for that. That's speculation. Definitely his emphasis was on energy, chi, health. But as time passed and the monks needed to defend themselves because they came under attack, then it moved more towards being a fighting art.
That makes sense. So that's an interesting story. I was about to ask that question because everything you're describing there really says that 90, if not 100%, was coming from the mind and concentration. But that, and actually, like yoga, it makes me think of the kind of relationship. A lot of people do yoga have no idea really of the relationship between yoga and Buddhism, and that yoga is ultimately a kind of physical form of meditation. But that becoming something that would also discipline physical combat was that part where they actually had to use it in battle, right? Yeah.
So I was going to kind of divert onto what you're mentioning there. There's an Indian word that I probably pronounce really badly, but it's something like jhana.
Yeah.
And it means no mind, absence of mind.
In Buddhism they practice the jhanic stages of jhana, which I think there's 4 stages of jhana.
When that came to China, it's termed Jhun, which is spelt Chan. Jhun Buddhism is the Buddhism of jhana, the Buddhism of no mind. And when that reaches Japan, then the pronunciation becomes Zen. So the whole eastern branch of Buddhism, which we will call Zen, which is practiced in China, Korea, Japan, all stems from Bodhidharma at the Shaolin Temple. And it's my speculation, but this guy's a monk. He's not really interested in kicking ass. Yeah. Why is he teaching monks this kind of discipline? Because he wants to train their minds. And, back to what he says, don't look elsewhere for a Buddha when your own mind is the Buddha. But how do you get into the mind? How do you train somebody's mind? We make it nice and simple and easy to visualize. You're really wound up. Mind is in overdrive, and I tell you to calm down. Yeah. Does it help? No. Does it make you want to punch me straight in the mouth? Definitely, yeah. Because you're wound up, but you can't change it. You can't. You're in that emotional state. So words are useless. And then back to the teaching of Bodhidharma, go beyond language, go beyond thought. Yeah. Bypass the words, bypass the conscious thinking, get straight to the subconscious. So somebody's wound up. Do you tell them to calm down? No. Suggest. Breathe. Yeah. Breathe calmly. Breathe deeply. Take as many long, deep breaths as you want. Now, you access the mind through breathing. So if your breath is calm, you're just not set up, you're not programmed to deal with the conflict, the inconsistency, so the mind will calm down to match the breath. So when we tell someone calm your mind, it's like, well, great, you can say that, what do I do? When you tell someone to calm the breath, okay, I can do that, yeah. And through the breath you access the mind. Yeah. And back to Qi Kung. Qi is breath, yeah. So Qi Kung is China's equivalent to pranayama in yoga. The physical exercises in yoga help connect the mind with the body. So through your body you access your mind and you elevate your mind. Yeah. And exactly the same thing is going on in Kung Fu. So Bodhidharma was clearly not just a monk, he was an exceptional monk. It's one of the most influential monks in the development of Buddhism. And to me, his emphasis on teaching these kind of physical practices is really, really kind of groundbreaking, because he's getting straight to the mind through the body, through the breath, and it's the easiest way to get there. And clearly, in his opinion, sitting in meditation was only part of the picture. Yeah, the cultivating the breath, cultivating the body are equally important parts. So at the root of Shaolin Kung Fu, that's what you've got. Now it's then the physical fighting side has been further developed, and certainly the Shaolin monks were famous for being the kind of ultimate martial artists. But that's where it's come from. And if we look back at Muay Thai, it traces back to arts which are very much cultural. It's very much Thai culture. But it's now taken a direction of a sport. And as soon as martial arts take the direction of the sport, then the philosophy just becomes sports philosophy.
I mean, I think, funnily enough, that's exactly what's happened with yoga. It's not necessarily a sport, but it certainly as a Western practice now, it's lost that kind of connection to the sutras and Patanjali's book and all of that stuff, which kind of people who are really practicing would understand. But I think most people in a modern studio would know the poses physically, but have no relationship to the original kind of yoga sutras.
Yeah.
Just putting this all into kind of daily practice. So obviously, I know a number of the guys at your school, and what does a day look like? What do people do? I mean, there is qigong. There's some physical practice. There's some meditation. Do you mix everything up? How is a typical day at the Kung Fu school?
We start off at 6 a.m. doing soft qigong, which it has no martial element to it. It's cultivating the qi in the body, stretching the body. And that in itself, it's a moving meditation. So when we talk about meditation in English, we tend to think of somebody sitting in a lotus position. That's a static meditation, but there's also moving meditations. And we're very much towards moving meditation. Then we'll do the white crane internal art, which it's the easiest way to describe it as being something like Tai Chi. And that's really deep. That's got a lot to it. Then we have a break for Chinese tea, and that's the kind of discussion time. And if you don't practice, you get nowhere. But you do need the kind of discussion to go with it. Then after the tea break, we're on to the more physical kung fu, but a slightly different lesson each day. 9 o'clock stretching session, 9:15 we take breakfast. And then some days we have a midday training session. That is quite a physical session. But again, there is a physical aspect to this, that we want the body to be fit. And the stretching is very important. Keep the body flexible. Stretching opens the meridians. Opening the meridians enables the circulation of qi. So training from 11 to 1, break, and then it's 3:30 to 6. 3:30 to 4:30 is stretching and kind of physical training. And then we've got an hour and a half on the Kung Fu lesson, which could be learning the Kung Fu routines, or it could be the kind of fighting training. Or sometimes I'll do, on the Mondays, I do what we call a master class, where we take one topic and look at it in a lot of depth. So Kung Fu, there'll always be training on the routines, the set exercises. The Japanese would call them kata. The Chinese they call Tao Lu, but routines, forms. Perfecting the exercises, perfecting the movement. And we train 5 days a week, 2 days for recovering. So it starts soft and then gets harder. Yeah. Well, the more experience that you get, probably the less emphasis you need to put on the physical training, and the more you need to put on perfecting the fine points of what you're doing.
And there's a grading system, right? In Kung Fu, so which is just so you can. Is it belted or is it grades?
We don't give different belts, but it is the equivalent of kind of progressing through a belt system. The belt system was more a Japanese invention, but it's become much more developed since the martial arts became commercialized. And it does work well. It is a good incentive, but it has its negative points as well. So originally in Kung Fu there was no changing colours of they use sashes, Kung Fu sashes instead of belts. Now a lot of clubs give out different coloured sashes, but it's a bit of a kind of concession to commercialism. So it does look a bit tacky. So we don't go down that route.
Which I've got a question on that in a minute. But in terms of where you sit then with being a teacher of this certain school of Kung Fu, and Master Iain is how your students would talk. Is that because you've got to a certain level within that grading? Is it because you've gone through different kind of training, or is it all part of the same process?
So we're almost asking what makes you a master.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very tricky one. It's a very tricky one to answer.
I suppose to just pick up on something you just said, you kind of said as people get further along the path, it becomes less about the physical, right, more about the concentration, the mental, and which is kind of internalized anyway to a point. Yeah. So you can't really go out and externally judge that necessarily. So I suppose that's why I asked the question. It's interesting. Yeah, what does I certainly know? It's different to Buddhism, but obviously in the monastery there are certain processes, and to go from to be an abbot at the end of the day versus being, you know, a kind of lay monk. But it's presumably quite different to that. There's more structure around, or is it? Yeah.
Okay, so to progress through the gradings, you're going to have to learn a series of progressively more difficult routines and a higher number of routines. And there's a syllabus that you will work your way through. And to get to the end of it is going to be very difficult. But the idea of being a master is slightly separate to that. The master is the kind of the head of the school. The master is the repository of knowledge, and the master is generally appointed by his master based on suitability. So a lot of people nowadays appoint themselves as master, and obviously there's no criteria other than I love myself. But if you in the old way, that's pretty hardcore. And the way the hierarchy kind of works, the master is the overseer. A master's job is to say, right, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. To run the school, to develop the students, to be on top of everything. And it's not just about standing in front of the class, it's about knowing how to organise the whole thing. Especially in the old Kung Fu schools, the senior student would be who taught most of the classes, So a master is probably 45-year-olds plus, maybe significantly older. The senior student is probably 25, 30 and very fit and sets a good example. And then you got the grandmaster. And this is the funny one that's really normally misinterpreted in the West. Because it's like, okay, I'm not just a master, I'm a grandmaster. And I've seen people calling themselves ultimate grandmaster as well. But I'm so good that I'm a grandmaster. In the real Kung Fu way, I mean, it's very much like the family. You've got the father and you've got the grandfather. The master is the equivalent of the father, with the students being the children. The grandmaster is the grandfather. So when a master passes on that title to the next generation, it's basically saying, I'm going into semi-retirement. I'm going to kick back and you're taking over now. So the weight's on your shoulders. I've done my bit. So the grandmaster is generally a pretty old guy who is passing it on to the next generation, but is there as the reference point. And ideally, the older you get, the more experience you have, the more wisdom you have. And it's interesting that this concept is intuitive to humans, because we're set up to understand what our parents are and what our grandparents are. And it comes up in the films, and again, it's probably going to sound really silly, but Star Wars, Luke's a student. Yeah. Obi-Wan, he's functioning as the master. Yeah, he's the master. He's teaching Luke, the student. Yeah. The grandmaster, that's Yoda. who is sitting in a swamp, which in China would have been a tea shop or whatever. And if you really want to know something, you've got to go and see the Grandmaster and you talk to him about it. And in Kung Fu Panda, you've got the panda, and you've got, I can't remember what animal the master is, but you've got the old tortoise that spends most of his time meditating.
I haven't watched it. I'm glad you brought up Kung Fu Panda though, because
The old tortoise is the Grandmaster, yeah. So in the films, the Grandmaster tends to spend most of his time in contemplation. The Grandmaster is not a Grandmaster because he can jump higher and punch harder, and it's generally kicking around. And the Grandmaster's the one who has kind of surpassed the physical and is on the more spiritual level.
And what's Vader? So Darth Vader's the challenge of settling the mind, is he? I suppose.
Well, that's an interesting one as well, because the theme of so many kung fu films, stories, it's the student who's strayed off the path, who is left the path of good, taken the path of evil, and is purely concerned with the kind of the martial fighting, whatever, and has sacrificed the philosophy, and is then a threat to everybody else. And it's that's your classic film plot.
It's a good comparison, to be honest. It's a good way of describing kung fu.
The whole Star Wars thing. I mean, it was quite a good story that he wrote. That in the beginning, I'm trying to remember what Darth Vader's called when he's young. Anakin. Yeah, he's good, and he's on the path of the Jedi, and then he's corrupted by the Emperor, and he's kind of turned aside, and in the end he kind of, as he's dying, he looks back and wishes he hadn't gone that way. So good story writing, but you have this kind of argument now which is bashed out on keyboards everywhere. Are traditional martial arts dead? Is it all about MMA? Has MMA really made everything else obsolete?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly. I mean, this is probably kind of good segue for the next question, really. But MMA has kind of killed boxing, although boxing's making a bit of a comeback. Boxing you wouldn't necessarily call a martial art, but everything you've described to me puts kung fu in quite a different place. Yeah, and going back to the comparison to yoga, which is very different to what it started off as. How does something like kung fu stay relevant? Can it stay relevant? Does it have to change? Is there an opportunity where the physical element becomes something that is more popularized? What are your views on the ability to stay relevant with the practice?
Yeah. There's a brilliant quote from there's an American guy called W. Edward Deming, that adaptation's not compulsory, neither is survival. If you look historically at kung fu, it's always changed. Yeah, we tend to think of it as being a very fixed thing. This is traditional; it's always been like that, but it hasn't. It always changes. My own opinion, if you want to teach martial arts for competition, kung fu is not the way forwards. Yeah, it was never developed for competition. It's not appropriate for competition. So don't waste your time. MMA is appropriate for only a very small proportion of people. It's only for the young and fit, and you got to be physically tough. and very few people will make it to the top. All fighting sports are the same. I've been involved in this for over 40 years now, and I've done a lot of training of competition teams, fighting teams in the past. And it's quite a sad thing that doesn't matter how much training you do, and it doesn't matter who you train with, and people don't understand this until they've been in it for a long time. You've either got it or you haven't. And to draw on examples from boxing, because they're more familiar to most people, the likes of Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, they were exceptional individuals. And sure, they trained hard, yeah, and they put their kung fu in, they put a lot of effort in, they put a lot of study in. But not anybody can become what they were. And it doesn't matter what fighting sport you study, it's the same thing. And if you're good at it and you're lucky, then you can get to the top and you earn a lot of money. And it's a tiny, tiny proportion of the people who do it earn good money. Yeah. To take examples from Muay Thai, Sen Chai and Bukau, they're millionaires, yeah. And everybody else isn't earning very much at all, not really. If you come from a poor Thai farming family and you make it to one of the big stadiums in Bangkok, you can do pretty well compared to the rest of your family. But no, there's no big money there. If we look at the traditional martial arts, everybody can progress. Everybody can develop themselves. And we're living in a time of deteriorating mental health globally, breakdown of family unit, increasing stress. I mean, stress levels are going through the roof. Frankly, humanity's falling apart. And for a lot of people, Kung Fu is the answer. How does it compare with yoga? It's a really hard question to answer. But certainly for young and kind of active and slightly aggressive people, it's a lot more appealing than yoga.
It's also
probably
a lot more appealing than, this kind of trend of going into a 10-day Vipassana because you've heard it'll help your mind out, which you see people doing right from the West and haven't ever meditated, and they jump into 10 days sitting in silence, which can be probably more damaging than good unless you had some sort of practice. Whereas it sounds for me like, Kung Fu has, you're getting the essence of what you need to get from that, but with a lot more wrapped around it and a lot more guidance and physical elements. So, yeah.
It's very complex, though. Kung Fu is for life. It's a lifetime's study. It's a lifetime's journey. And it doesn't work if you give up. That's your problem with it. If you stick to it, then you always progress. Everybody's progressing. Everybody's kind of where we came in, really. Everybody's finding their own solution, their own values out of it. And it's got so much to offer, but you do need a good teacher, and this is the problem. There's not many good masters around, and this really is the trouble. You can get plenty of people who run a local kung fu club, and they put the people in for the gradings and competitions, but the depth isn't there. and particularly in the West, where it's often kind of separated from the cultural, philosophical aspects, and there's just concentration on the fighting. It's not to minimise the fighting stuff. The fighting stuff's important. Yeah, it makes you work on yourself. But can the teacher take you further? Can the teacher take you past that? You need someone who's got the kind of philosophical, cultural element. And to have that, you've got to study Chinese philosophy. You've got to have a reasonable understanding of Buddhism, Taoism and Confucianism. And not so many people have that. And it's much easier if you've studied under Chinese people, in Chinese communities where they've still got it. And even that is getting much harder. I studied in Singapore, but we had quite a lot of contact with Malaysians as well, Malaysian Chinese. And at the time, they were still very Chinese. In mainland China, it's constantly changing, but the Cultural Revolution was basically cultural extermination. It was get rid of Chinese culture because it's not communist. So the older style Chinese thinking you find more in the Chinese communities outside of China. But if you look at Singapore now, they're doing their best to become more westernized than the West. I get students sometimes from Singapore. I say, what language group do you come from? It's a bit embarrassing, really, but we can't actually speak Chinese.
Well, English is the first language there.
Yeah.
So it has changed a lot, right, in the last...
The culture's disappeared. Malaysia, it's still quite strong, and Taiwan probably the strongest. I was lucky I had a teacher that spoke really good English. But this is, so Kung Fu's got loads and loads to offer. But you've got to have the right teacher to unlock it for you. But that's my vision of where Kung Fu is going, is that it's something which is going to sort out people's mental health, people's stress and anxiety, people's need for a structure in their life. It's perfect for all of that. And there's a lot of people at the moment that are completely lost.
I agree with you, and I think it's there's more of these sorts of disciplines and practices needed for sure. It's I know, knowing the little I do about your school before I visited the other week, there's always people around, and there's always people even during the kind of tough couple of years, there's always been students, people staying there. I know it's been tricky, but at least there does seem to be a level of popularity and people coming over for it. So
well, I'm really hoping that travel will resume and that we'll get a lot more people, but we have to see.
Well, let's hope so. There's going to be a few stressed people out there in the last couple of years. Look, really appreciate you spending a bit of time to kind of just scratch the surface, really. If people want to find out more about yourself, about the school, about Kung Fu, do you want to share the email, the web address?
I think go to kungfuretreat.com. Go to kungfuretreat.com. Retreat, as in, that's us, the retreat, Kung Fu. Not difficult to remember. And there's actually a lot more information up there, and it's pretty easy to contact us. Cool.
Well, for anyone who's watching, I'll put that web address in the notes and any other links that you want to share. But appreciate you giving some time and sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
A little bit on
Thanks a lot,
Kung Fu.
Matthew. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Master Iain. All the best.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah. The words Kung Fu mean hard work over a long time. If you don't have to work hard for it, it's not Kung Fu. It's not about what you get. It's about what you learn through that hard work. The Tao Te Ching says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. This is somewhere we can train full time. Somewhere where we can devote ourselves totally to our art. When we train together, the intention is not to outdo each other, it's to grow together. After our training program, it's generally considered that food is the most important element in our physical development. Everything that we put into our mouths is a medicine. That's why we take such care with our diet. That's why we grow our own food, our own herbs, and prepare them ourselves. In Kung Fu, flow is everything. Movement should flow like water. It's soft, it's fluid, but immensely powerful. When we learn to flow like water, we take on that power. old saying in Kung Fu that when the time is right, the student will find the master. Search, and you will find your path.
To do what we
The
want to
two were
do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barker, the president of the Hells Angels.
This is 1095.